We'll probably have a couple more people jump on as we get going. I'm going to share my screen in just a second, although I kind of feel like maybe it's not necessary since we have the panelists here, and we can kind of just go around and introduce them. Big congratulations to all of them since they have been through this process and been accepted somewhere. So woohoo, yay. Big pressure off of all of you at this point. We're so excited for you. We have Isaac here, Julia, Amber, and Hope. I'm going to hand the baton off to them to introduce themselves. Perhaps Julia, if you want to get started and just share a little bit about, introduce yourself, maybe some educational background information, your graduation date, profession you're pursuing, and if you know where you'll be attending health profession school, please share that as well.
Thank you, Anna. So I'm Julia. I graduated from Northeastern with my bachelor's in health science and a minor in global health last May. I continued at Northeastern to pursue an accelerated Master of Public Health, so I'll be graduating again this May. I'm super excited. I did one co-op while I was at Northeastern. I actually created my own. I worked as a surgical assistant, and that's when I studied for the DAT. And in June, I applied to 13 schools, and I heard back from 10 of them, and I'm excited to share that I will be attending UPenn for dental school in August.
Amber, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. My name is Amber. I actually just graduated from Northeastern in December, so I did 4.5 years. I was a bio major with a minor in health humanities and society. When I was there, I did 3 co-ops. I was a medical assistant in 3 different clinics, and then I also worked as a PCA one summer at a hospital. I applied to PA school last spring. I submitted to 12 schools and heard back from 9, and I have decided to go to Northeastern for my PA.
Isaac, would you like to go?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So excited to be here. So my name is Isak. I graduated Northeastern from 2021. I studied cell and molecular biology and women's gender sexuality studies. I took 2 gap years. I'm currently working as a medical assistant at dermatology practice. That's where I am right now. I did 2 co-ops, one at DFCI doing radiation oncology research, and then another one at MGH where I did clinical research coordinating. So I'm pre-med, or I was pre-med. I applied to both MD and DO schools. I applied to a little over 20 or around 25 schools. I heard back from 15. I've gotten into all of them except for 2 I haven't heard back from yet, and I'm still deciding where I'm going to go. But I have it kind of narrowed down to either Duke, Dartmouth, or Pitt. So I'll kind of have those to pick around from. But yeah, I'm really excited to be here, especially underrepresented students in medicine. If you're in this and have any questions for me, I'd love to answer them.
Thank you, and Hope.
Hi, everyone. My name's Hope. I am currently in my 4th year at Northeastern, majoring in cell molecular biology, minoring in global health. I have done 2 co-ops while being here. One of them was kind of 2 part-time positions at once. I was at Brigham and Women's doing newborn hearing screens, and at Dana-Farber working in a wet lab. And my second one was clinical research at Mass General. I applied this past cycle to 23 schools, I think, and I've interviewed at 7, into 2 of them so far, waitlisted at 1, and waiting to hear from 4. So hopefully in the next couple weeks, I will have a decision.
Thank you all for sharing. For our audience members, feel free to use the chat to enter some questions. This is going to be a pretty informal event, so anything you'd like to ask our panelists, whether it's one person in particular or if you want to hear multiple perspectives, because we do have a few health professions here represented, go ahead and enter that into the chat and we can read those questions off. But just to kind of get started, I would like to hear from the panelists in terms of, you were preparing all throughout undergrad to be ready to apply. I'm just curious if you guys could share a little bit how you knew you were ready to apply, when you knew you were competitive in terms of choosing which cycle was the right one for you. And then hopefully when you guys have sort of responded to that, we'll have some questions from the audience. And anyone can sort of get started.
I'll go first. I had kind of always planned to apply at the end of my 4th year and then do an extra semester after instead of graduating in 4. I wanted to do 3 co-ops. But I just felt like, I had planned for a really long time, but I also just knew because I had been researching schools for a couple of years and staying up to date on their requirements. And I had at least met all of the requirements at that time. I had exceeded them at a lot of the schools I applied to, and that's why I felt like I was ready to go.
I can give my 2 cents. Oh, I can go real quick. But so yeah, for pre-med, I feel like Northeastern is a really good job experience-wise for you to apply straight through if you are comfortable with that. I personally knew that I wanted to, one, have a few years off of school just to do other things other than schooling. And then I also really wanted to be able to work in a clinical atmosphere. That was something that I kind of neglected during undergrad. So I kind of wanted to focus that more during my gap year. So when it comes to knowing when you're ready, definitely just like be honest with yourself and like what you're most comfortable with. I feel like a lot of people feel pressure to go straight through, even though statistics are showing that the average age for matriculants now for first years are like leaning towards like 24, 25. So people are definitely taking more gap years. So don't feel, I guess, ashamed of it because it's really more of a common trend right now, even if it's just for your own well-being. I am a big advocate of that. But also see where like your application might have some faults or might have some gaps. I know a lot of people have gaps when it comes to clinical experiences because of COVID. So if there's kind of a gap within that, you might want to be able to fill that in during your gap year. So definitely be able to kind of self-reflect and see how you can kind of go from there. Also, the MCAT's a thing too, so you kind of have to fit that in too. But definitely don't be afraid to take gap years if you are afraid.
Yeah, kind of building off of that, I would say deciding to go straight through for MD was definitely a little bit stressful, just knowing the fact that so many people are taking gap years now. So that was definitely a big consideration for me. Definitely thought about a gap year and thought about kind of how a gap year would actually build on my education. And I kind of felt like I had already worked in a lot of the Boston hospitals. And I'd done like clinical research, done some clinical work, and worked in a wet lab, and didn't really feel like I wanted to do any more of any of those at the level that I would be able to in a gap year. So I was kind of thinking that the only thing that I would want to do during a gap year would be to travel, maybe do some global health work because that was canceled for me throughout undergrad because of COVID. But then kind of thinking about traveling and being gone for that entire year, I realized that I didn't really want to do that for a whole year. So if I was feeling ready to apply, I was going to do it. And I think, I mean, looking back at the past year, I don't think I've had any huge experience in my 4th year that would have added a ton to my application. If anything, maybe some smaller classes that would have led to more personalized recommendations. But other than that, I definitely felt ready with my experiences to apply. And with med school, I mean, they give you kind of general numbers for hours that you might want to have, but really, as long as you can tell a story with your application, there's no set number that you need.
So we have some questions in the chat. This one is for our pre-med panelists. Somebody is asking, when did you submit your application? In terms of which month, May, June, July?
I did it the first day. I just wanted to get it over with, just apply pretty early on, which I feel like everyone would pretty much recommend. You have access to the AMCAS portal. I forget when, but it opens up like a month or so before you can actually submit the primaries. So you definitely have enough time to like understand what is needed in the application. The pre-med office does a really cool job at kind of prepping you for that as well. And when it comes to like letters of rec, requesting transcripts, all that jazz. So you definitely will be prepared and ready to apply that first day if you're comfortable with it. But it's really whenever your application is ready. I know some people have some interesting timelines when it comes to MCAT. So it's really when you feel most prepared. I don't think anyone would recommend submitting an application when it's not ready. So I suggest that you definitely have time to reread it over, have other people look at it too. But I think the general consensus is earlier the better.
For me, I had kind of a unique timeline with my MCAT just because I took it in May of my third year. So I was waiting for my score. So kind of the loophole with that is that you submit your application to one school and then wait to get your score and then kind of finalize your school list and submit the rest of them. But it allows for your application to be verified. So I still kind of gave myself a little bit of a break after the MCAT. So I want to say I submitted it like a week or two after it opened, just because I wanted to make sure that it was revised as much as I wanted to. And it ended up being verified in time. There was kind of like a stressful moment where I wasn't sure if it was going to happen, but it ended up all working out. So I think as long as you get it in those, like that first week or two, then you'll be kind of in that first round.
Thank you. And I know we have two different professions represented that haven't answered, Amber for PA and Julia for dental. I know the question was intended for pre-med, but I would like to hear the timeline for your submissions as well.
So with the Adia AdSense application, there's a soft launch in May. I think this year opens on May 9th. So you can go in and you can input all of your information, request your transcripts, and then on May 30th, you'll be able to submit everything. So when I went through the application process, I did start inputting information as soon as I could. And because I also graduated the same week that the portal opened, I had to wait for my transcript to be finalized. And then I spent the next 3 weeks finalizing my personal statement, doing supplemental questions, and I submitted on the first day that I could submit all of my applications.
Yeah, so CASPA opened, I think the beginning, like at very end of April or beginning of May or something. You can go on CASPA at any time, like create an account and then fill out like at least like the demographic information ahead of time and kind of take a look at it and like see what is expected of you on the application, which is what I did like the year before my application year. And then once it opens up, like reopens at the end of April, you can just transfer your information. But you can't like request transcripts like a year ahead of time. You have to wait until your application cycle. So once it opened, I immediately requested my transcripts, transferred over everything that I had already filled out. And then I looked at like my supplemental questions. My personal statement was already done at that point. So it was just doing supplemental questions for the next like few weeks. And I submitted, I think the last week of May. You want to submit as soon as possible with CASPA because a lot of PA schools are rolling admissions. So the sooner they see your application, the more likely you are to get an interview.
Thank you. Can you all share a little bit about how you decided which schools to apply to? And maybe we can start with Julia this time. And then Julia, feel free to choose someone next.
So when I was a freshman, I actually created a list of all the dental schools I was interested in, which I know sounds pretty ambitious, but I just kept it so I knew what schools I was interested in, the regions I was interested in going to. I'm from New Jersey, so I was looking mainly in the Northeast. And then as I went through like co-op, taking the DAT, I narrowed that list down to 13 schools. And something that you want to be mindful of when you're making your list is if you're going to be considered an in-state or out-of-state applicant, because there are some schools that are going to, I don't want to say like give preference to students who are in-state, but they'll say they don't give preference, but they kind of do give preference. And being a New Jersey resident, I was only in-state for Rutgers. And so there were schools, I think I applied to 4 schools that I was considered an out-of-state student for, and I did kind of roll the die with them. And I was lucky enough to get interviews at them and acceptances. So I would just be mindful of if you think you have a competitive enough score, GPA, experiences where you can be considered a competitive out-of-state applicant and apply to those schools if you can really see yourself going to them. Definitely don't apply to schools that you don't really see yourself at. And I think that attending like impressions days or school visit days, I don't know if med schools or PA schools do that, but dental schools do that, go to them and see the campus, talk to students, because there were schools that I visited after my interview as part of the interview process, and I realized that I couldn't see myself there, and I was really glad that I did that. Sorry, Amber, you can go next.
Okay. So I created, once I knew I was going to go to PA school, which was like my second year, I did create a list. I mean, obviously it was very like preliminary because things had changed, like things changed over the rest of my time at Northeastern. But there's this like book you can get, and I forget what it's called, but it basically lists like general stats for accepted students to different programs in different states. I don't know if I would necessarily recommend that, but clinical hours is huge for the PA school application. It's like probably one of your most important parts. And you have to make sure you line up with the in the range of the accepted students, because you're obviously more likely to get accepted. I mean, that doesn't mean if you're not within the range, you're not going to get accepted. I got accepted to schools that I was below the range, but you want to have a good mix of, okay, I'm in the range for these schools, I'm well above the range for these schools, and I'm below a range for a couple of schools. And then also making sure your class requirements meet up, because PA school has weird, like every PA school has different class requirements. So like some schools require medical terminology, which I just did not want to pay more money when I was already paying a ton of money for my undergrad. So I didn't apply to those schools. Some PA schools require a diploma before you can even apply, which I had not graduated at the time of application, so I couldn't apply to any of those schools. And then obviously region was a huge factor. I'm from Massachusetts. I went to my undergrad in Massachusetts. I wanted to stay mostly in the Northeast, though I did apply to a couple of schools in the South and in the West. So that's obviously a huge factor to consider, like whether or not you're going to be happy at school. Yeah, I think that was it. And I will say, Wyzak, if you want to go.
Yeah, sure. So when it comes to making my list, you both Julie and Amber covered really important parts. One, cost. As you all know, it can be quite hefty. I was lucky that I applied for the FAP, which if you're applying to MCAS, I recommend everyone do it, even if you're unsure if you qualify for it. I feel like it doesn't hurt to apply anyway. So with that, you get 20 schools you can apply for both the primary and secondaries for free. And if you all don't know, for med schools through the AMCAS, you do a fee for your primary applications, and then secondary applications also cost, and you have to get invited to those. So cost is definitely a thing, and you kind of have to see where you can kind of finance that. So that was one aspect. And then, yeah, when it comes to kind of seeing if you're a good fit with a school, something called the MSAR or MSAR, which I think there is unfortunately a fee to pay for that. But you can see a lot about the missions of all the schools, locations, average statistics when it comes to like MCAT and GPA and all that such is on there too. But like what everyone else was saying, just all these processes are such a shot in the dark. So never doubt yourself when it comes to applying to a school. Other than the cost and the effort when it comes to writing these essays, you aren't losing much by applying somewhere and then getting rejected or ghosted. So I really do recommend that, and not being afraid to apply to places. There's places that were considered like reach for me that I got into, but then schools that are target that I haven't heard back from. So definitely take that into accord. And yeah, location as well. That's really important to a lot of people. I'm personally really open to going anywhere. So I applied to all over the country, and yeah, that's kind of how I made my list. And then Christina, you can go.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I also used MSAR. I went through and basically put like all of the schools that I thought I might be interested in into a spreadsheet with some of the like big characteristics that I thought might help me make a decision. And I know that I want to work with urban underserved populations, so definitely knew that I wanted to stay in a city. So that helps narrow things down a little bit. And beyond that, I mean, I also applied all over the country. I think the mission statements have are definitely helpful in making the decision, just because you can read that and decide if it kind of aligns with your values and what you want to learn as a med student. So I think those were the biggest things. And then I kind of just went through like the spreadsheet that I made and narrowed down that list to the 23 schools that I ended up applying to.
Thank you. We have 2 questions in the chat regarding personal statements. So I don't expect anyone to pull theirs out and read it, but I am curious if anyone would like to share sort of how they approached that, kind of maybe a little bit of some general advice on the types of things that one might share in a personal statement. And Julia, would you like to start? Sorry, I keep picking on you, but I want to kind of switch it up every time.
Yeah, that's okay. So I planned my application cycle so that I wouldn't be studying for the DAT at the same time. I wanted to give myself a year to be able to focus on like letters of recommendation, supplementals, personal statement, my undivided attention on that. So I started to write my personal statement in January, and I went through maybe 5 or 6 drafts. I had a family friend who was an English professor help me, and when I started writing my personal statement, I knew that there were 2 different stories I kind of wanted to talk about, and I wasn't really sure how I could put them together, if I should just focus on one. And so I just wrote my personal statement. I ignored the character limit because for the dental application, I think you get 4,500 characters, which is very short. It's less than a page. So I just wrote it out, everything, all of my thoughts that I had, and then I edited it from there. And then once I was at a spot that I was happy with, I had Sierra, my pre-dental advisor, read it over. And when she liked it, I had one of the people who wrote my letters of recommendation read it, and they said it was good too. So I was like, okay, like I think I'm at where I wanted to be. So I think I was done editing and finalizing my personal statement by April. So when May came around and the soft launch opened for the dental application, I just inputted it and I was ready to go.
Isaac, would you like to go?
Yeah, sure. So personal statements. When it comes to like when I decided to like think about this, I definitely knew I wanted to kind of give it a while. And like Julia, I feel like if you're studying for an exam or you're in classes and stuff, you really can't like fully commit to it. So I do recommend just being able to like actually like just be able to like have a day or a week or whatever and just be able to like really think about what you want to put into the statement. And as like silly it may seem, like just like an essay, it really does like summarize your entire kind of journey to medicine and what you want to kind of achieve through it. So I definitely suggest like really putting a lot of thought and heart into it. I kind of, when I was in undergrad and I was going through these clinical experiences, I was kind of taking note of like what I was observing and like kind of what I wanted to like achieve for myself. And so being able to kind of have those experiences to reflect upon is really cool. And if you're at the beginning of your pre-med or pre-PA dental experiences, I definitely suggest like being able to kind of keep something in the back of your head, being like, oh, this might be good to mention in my personal statement. But other than that, it's really just your own personal narrative and your own personal journey. And you really have to be honest with yourself and what you want to display to the admissions committee and what really sells kind of your story. I really suggest, like Julia said, sharing it with people that you trust and love. I feel like that really allows for honest critiques and they get to understand like where you're coming from and help you kind of portray that as well. For people who don't have those kind of resources, one thing I did discover is something called Grammarly. I can put it in the chat. I know there's a bunch of ads of it on like Hulu and stuff, but it's you have to pay for it, but it's a software that like edits and it works on like theme and your voice. And I surprisingly really liked it. And I feel like I share it with someone else and they had really good results with it too. So if you don't have someone to like kind of bounce ideas with, that's another software that you can use. But yeah, other than that, just be willing to put a lot of work into it and be able to revise it a lot. The pre-op office does a lot of good work when it comes to revising things for you and is really willing to like put in the personal touches. So definitely be willing to take in critiques and be able to kind of build from there.
Amber or Hope, if either of you have anything else to share about a personal statement and themes to include, feel free to share.
I would just say like my biggest advice is like just try to sit down and write. Like once you have like a couple of ideas, like I was so obsessed with, oh my God, how am I going to make it like 5,000 words on my first try and like make it perfect? And it's not going to be perfect the first time you write it. And that's why you have people revise it. And that's why you look it over. And that's why you do it ahead of time. And also don't try to make it fit into the word, like obviously try to be close to the word limit, but like 5,000 characters is very short. And so obviously it's hard for you to like sum up your entire career leading up to this point in 500 or 5,000 characters. So just try your best, but if it's a little bit over, you can always revise it. Don't obsess over it being perfect on the first try, because I felt like that is what was the hardest part for me writing my personal statement. And once I just started writing off of like the few like key moments from the past few years, it all came together in the end. And I also just like reiterating what Isaac said, like it is super important to like keep in mind things throughout your clinical experiences or research experiences or academic experiences that you might want to write about in your personal statement. And if you're one to like forget stuff, even writing it down in like a notebook so that you can go back during your application process, because sometimes it can be hard to remember things when you're trying to put everything on an application.
And then we do have a question about like advice for secondaries. So like kind of on a similar note of personal statement, when you get your secondaries, you're getting them like all at once and it's a lot and they need to be sort of unique and specific to those schools. So Hope, not to put you on the spot, but maybe you would want to start us out with how you sort of approach secondaries, how you managed completing them all in a timely manner, and then some advice on, making them very specific and unique to each school.
Yeah, definitely. I think building off of the personal statement stuff, you're gonna have like so many drafts by the end of writing it. Definitely keep all of them because there were some stories that I like wrote out and then didn't end up including in my personal statement that were super relevant to some of the secondary questions. So it's definitely really helpful to kind of just like write out all of your experiences, like what you've learned from them. And I know you guys do that for the committee letter anyway. But I definitely took a ton from those and kind of like built off of them and elaborated on the stories. In terms of just like completing all of them and organizing everything, I like had that spreadsheet from choosing schools and kind of just like put the dates and like when I received secondaries in there. And then I just had like a folder on Google Drive and kind of like pasted all the prompts for each individual school into a document and would just kind of work on all of them. There are definitely stories that you can write out that kind of work for multiple prompts, and then in your elaboration, you can explain how it exemplified your leadership versus like working on a team or something like that. So I think that you can definitely have some overlap, but it's really important to kind of like read them out loud and revise them. And also reread the mission of the school and make sure that what you're writing really applies to the mission of that school.
Does anyone else want to share some advice on approaching secondaries? And if not, we can move to the next question.
I just have a little bit to add. So completely agree with Hope when it comes to kind of tackling secondaries, that there is a lot of overlay with them. Like you'll definitely hear something about like teamwork or like diversity or other things like that. But when it came to actually confronting secondaries, I decided to pre-write a good amount of them. So you will have access to the past year secondary prompts. So a lot of them will stay the same year throughout year. And so like why this school is a very common one. So if you see that the school will require that for secondaries, it doesn't hurt to pre-write it. You may not need to use it, or there may need to be an additional essay. But I really appreciate that because I didn't realize how much of a grind secondaries would be. It's different than the MCAT for sure, but it is a time-consuming process, and it does feel like there's a lot of pressure on that because you're essentially stating why you think your essay or your application should be viewed. So I definitely wouldn't. I definitely would try and put a good amount of effort into these and trying to incorporate similar themes that you covered in your personal statement, because I have a feeling that like these admission teams really like overlaying themes and kind of being able to like trace a thread throughout your time at in undergrad or your time in a gap year. They like to see those kind of recurring themes. And if you plan on doing that with your medical degree as well, they'd love to see that kind of transition as well. So if you can kind of incorporate that, I think that's really cool and something that they would definitely appreciate.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to the next question in regards to like extracurricular type experiences. I'm hoping that you guys can, when you go around, just sort of share some of the activities that you participated in. And then we always get asked, like, how many hours of this do I need? And even though, yes, you might find hour sort of suggestions out there, and in PA for particular, there are set hours that you need or shadowing hours and things like that. If you can kind of give us an idea of the depth and the breadth of your activities, the range of things that you did and the length of time that you did them, I think that that would be helpful. Amber, would you like to start?
Sure. So I would say for extracurriculars, I was in a couple of clubs at Northeastern, but I didn't go like crazy. I know there are some people that are in like a million different clubs. I just knew I couldn't keep up with that many. I was in Pure Health Exchange, which then became BHI, and I was in that since my freshman year at school, and eventually transitioned to leadership in that organization, as well as NUEMS. I was in that since my freshman year, transitioned to leadership. I was in the pre-PA club and then Tri Beta, but those were more like casual clubs. Attendance wasn't required. It was easier for me to keep up with those ones. So my major club commitments were NUEMS and BHI. I volunteered. So my freshman year, I volunteered at MGH. And then once COVID hit, it was obviously really hard to volunteer. So I started doing Crisis Text Line, which is an online volunteering, which I think is really great for people who need flexibility. For me, like, I had continued working, like I was on co-op and then I would continue to work through my classes because I needed money. And so that allowed a lot of flexibility for me. You can do it nights, weekends, literally whenever you have time. So I would really recommend that for people who are looking for a volunteer thing that's much more flexible. And then I think that's really it for extracurriculars for me. Besides working, obviously, I was working while I was in classes, but I think choosing things that you're passionate about is the most important thing with extracurriculars on your application. Everything that I was involved in, I was super passionate about, and a lot of the activities tied to the theme that was in my personal statement, specifically BHI. Like I was really focused on health equity in my undergrad, and that's something I will continue to focus on in PA school. And so make sure you're choosing things that you're passionate about because they're going to ask about it in interviews. Like they want to see that you actually care about what you're doing and that not that you're just doing a million different things.
Julia, would you like to go next?
So when I found out I got into Northeastern, I knew that I wanted to volunteer at a hospital in Boston. So I was a volunteer at Boston Children's Hospital for all 4 years. I was on campus. So I got about 250 volunteer hours from that. I also was a big sister one semester, which was a lot of fun. I think it's an on-campus club. So if you're interested in being a big brother, big sister, that's a great way to get out into the community off campus. I also joined Alpha Phi Omega, which is a co-ed community service fraternity on campus. And I got about 100 volunteer hours from that. That's a mix of on-campus volunteering and off-campus volunteering, as well as other just like social events. I did research. I can't quantify in the number of hours how much I did, but I was on the same research team for 3 years, and we have a paper that's going to be published very soon, which is exciting. In terms of shadowing hours, I started shadowing during my freshman year of college and throughout. In total, I probably had over 100 general dentist shadowing hours, and then I also had over 1,000 surgical assisting hours. So like I separated the general dentistry from the specialty shadowing hours, which you might have to do on your application. In terms of clubs, I was in the Pre-Dental Association. I worked my way up in the ranks to become the president by the time I graduated. I also founded Global Dental Brigades on campus and led the first volunteer trip to Panama last January, which was super exciting. I went on a dialogue to Ghana after my freshman year. So there's a lot of things that I did. I created a whole spreadsheet because honestly, if I had to list out everything, I couldn't remember it all. And also remember that you don't have to fit like all of the experiences you do into your personal statement or your supplementals, because if you get an interview, you'll have a chance to add on. So even though I had so much that I wanted to share on my application, like it doesn't always necessarily come through, but don't worry about that.
If anybody else wants to share, you can. But on a similar note, there's a question about like sort of entering your activities into your application. So as we sort of touched on, there are character limits for these activities. So I'm just wondering if, based on your extracurriculars, how did you decide the things that you really wanted to pull out and focus on when reflecting on your activities? Perhaps Isaac or Hope, one of you can start.
Yeah, sure. So I feel like the great answer to that is exactly what Julia and Amber were saying. You really need to be able to distinguish what you're actually passionate about versus something that a lot of people in pre-med feel like that there's a lot of boxes that need to be ticked. And in a sense there are, but at the same time, you have to actually have something rooted within them. You can't just be volunteering at BCH and like not being able to remark any remarkable experiences from that. So definitely be able to kind of, like I said before, self-reflect on like what you've done and what it meant for you and what it meant for others as well. I feel like that's really important. I was involved in a lot of the Black student orgs at Northeastern, as well as some of the queer affinity groups. So that's something really important to me when it comes to sharing camaraderie with people who are similarly identifying as me, especially within these minority disadvantaged groups. So being able to reflect why I did those experiences, what it meant for me, and what I want to incorporate those aspects with in the future, I think is really important when it comes to kind of making a list, because I think for AMCAS, you'll have like 15 experiences, if I remember right. And I feel like everyone has more than 15 experiences throughout the 4 or whatever years of undergrad. So definitely be able to reflect on what was important to you, what you got out of it, and what you hope to incorporate in the future. And character limits was definitely difficult. I think that's what I use Grammarly for mostly. Being able to like, I'm a ranter, so I tend to over explain things. So definitely be able to cut out just like fluff words is important. And it may not seem the most poetic and the most pretty when you have like 4 sentences for a prompt, but for the most part, they only do that just because they really want the cut and dry of what that experience was. So don't be afraid to seem like you're not fully encompassing it, because they really just want to see like the central objective or whatever that experience was. So definitely don't be afraid of that.
Hope, would you like to share your experience with the writing about your activities?
Sure. Yeah, I don't think I have too much to add to that. I think Isaac said, is that how you say your name? Yeah. Okay. I think it's really important to be able to tell your story throughout the application. So again, like picking the experiences that for me really focused on public health and health equity, were especially like in my freshman year, even those really early ones where I kind of started to understand that that might be something I was interested in. Those were definitely important. And then I guess the only other thing to add is, in terms of like your hours, you don't necessarily like write down all of your hours throughout undergrad. So I mean, I had like a calendar from freshman year, so I kind of looked back and I was like, oh, I did volunteer here like every week for a couple hours. So estimating that wasn't too hard. I did most of my shadowing in fall of my junior year. So I was kind of thinking about the application at that point and actually did kind of track my hours and write down some of the cases that I saw every week, and some of the more meaningful patient experiences. So if you do think to do that, it helps you down the line. But estimating is not too bad as long as you kind of have an idea of how frequently you went.
Thank you.
Can I add something real quick? So I just wanted to say that Amber and I both listed off a lot of like extracurriculars, volunteering opportunities, but I just want to point out that we did those because we wanted to do those. If you do something just to put it on your application, when you have to write about it, the schools are going to know. So yes, it sounds like we did a lot, but you don't have to have a million different experiences if you're passionate about them. It's just what we both wanted to do.
Good point. Thank you. When you all look back at the application process, do you have any advice to share in terms of like what you wish you had known, what you found to be the most difficult part of the application process, and then advice for your, peers who will be applying? I feel like for a lot of students, it seems really hard every moment of it, and then once they submit and they're sort of waiting seems to then be the hardest part. So, if you guys can just share a little bit about your experience and if you encountered any challenges, how you sort of got through that.
I can go first. So most challenging aspect. Well, I thought the MCAT was horrible, but besides the MCAT, when it came to kind of juggling everything when you're in the cycle itself, it can become a little overwhelming for sure. One thing that kind of annoys you with like medical schools is that they'll expect you to like have a job or have it keep going with your experiences during the cycle, but then at the same time they'll send you an interview invite, be like, oh, you're going to interview with us on this day at this time, see you there. And so it can be like 2 weeks out, and I have a job, and so it was kind of difficult balancing that, getting time off, being able to do the interview, being able to prep for the interview in time. But unfortunately, this is like the name of the game. So definitely being willing to be flexible is really important during this whole process. Being able to pivot your thought processes is really important. And yeah, so I think that was a challenge. And then something that surprised me, when it comes to the interviews themselves or just the process in general, I thought the interviews would be a lot based obviously on my experiences, but also based on like my GPA, my MCAT, my like statistics. But I can tell you, I took the MCAT twice. Not a single school mentioned that I had to take the MCAT twice. They never mentioned my GPA. They never mentioned my scores. They only talked to me about who I am as a person, what I want to do in medicine, my essays. So definitely when you are preparing yourself for interviews or for essays and such, definitely don't look at yourself in a statistical lens like you may think they may be looking at you. Obviously, there is some component of it, but definitely be ready to reflect more on yourself and on your experiences than your kind of concrete facets like grades and such. That definitely surprised me, and I honestly appreciated that, because when it comes to applying, you really do feel like a number sometimes. And so when they kind of ask you questions that make you feel like they actually care about like who you are and what you represent, that made me feel really well. So it's definitely something I didn't expect, but it definitely, the whole process itself was definitely rooted in that more.
Yeah, I would probably echo most of what or all of what Wazek said. Um, I would also say like waiting was a really big challenge for me. Like you're so much is built up in this whole process. Like you spent years preparing and then you submit and you're just like, now what? Like I think it's hard to remember that like it's going to take them time to read through the applications, and like just because you don't immediately hear back in like a few weeks or even a month, like that doesn't mean you're not going to get in. People are still getting interviews for PA schools, and like that's something you have to keep in mind. Like just because you submit in May and you don't hear by August, like it doesn't mean that you're not going to get in. um and just like have the confidence in yourself that you did your best in that application cycle, and that if it doesn't work out, you apply again, but you also, there's so much time, and they have an entire year essentially to offer you an interview. Um, so I think that that's just really important to keep in mind when you're applying, because it can be stressful when you don't hear back. Also, stay off of the internet, because there are forums out there that are like, oh, I got an interview and I got accepted and all of this stuff. Don't look at it, because you're gonna get stress and it doesn't help like at all. It doesn't mean anything that someone else got an interview. It doesn't mean you're not gonna get one. Yes, say no to Reddit is right. Reddit is toxic.
Julia or Hope, if you have anything to share on that, otherwise we can move to the next question.
Yeah, I was going to say, don't look at Student Doctor Network. Don't go on the Facebook groups. That waiting time, it's so easy to spiral and start comparing yourself to others. Just save yourself the energy and say to yourself, you know, I submitted my application, I put my best foot forward, and really believe that you did put your best foot forward because you're going to get in. You all deserve to go to great schools, and it's going to happen.
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, being kind of in my senior year, like already applied, I would say the interviews and the waiting have actually been like the best part because I'm still like so busy and still in school, and still kind of have all of those extracurricular activities going on. So I mean, obviously the interviews are a little bit stressful, but I think it's been kind of the best part of the process to just get to like reflect and have conversations about why you're excited to go into that field. Um, and the waiting honestly hasn't been that horrible either. I mean, it makes it easier that I heard from one place in like December, so I wasn't feeling like I was waiting until the end of the cycle to have an answer. But I think in general, it's not the worst part of the process. And I think, I mean, the hardest part, as Isaac said, is really just kind of juggling everything. Um, for me, it was that spring of my junior year, like taking the or studying for the MCAT and working and doing all of the extracurriculars. But once you get through that and apply, it is definitely a smoother road.
Thank you. Can a few of you share a little bit of advice on approaching faculty or clinician letter of recommendation, perhaps how you decided who to ask, or if you struggled, pardon me, if you struggled at all with, like, let's say, for example, finding a science faculty letter of recommendation, maybe you feel like you didn't have that close relationship, sort of how did you navigate that experience? Well, Isaac, do you want to go, or Julia, go,
Sorry.
you.
Oh,
No, you're
no, I'm
good.
sorry. Okay. So I knew who I wanted to ask, and and maybe other panelists struggled with this too. There were professors that I had, but then COVID happened, so the semester got cut short, and I didn't see them for a really long time, and maybe I didn't have to take the second or a third level of the course with them. So there were several professors who I hadn't seen in a while, and they were big classes that I took, so I wasn't sure that they remembered me or would know who I was if I asked them over email for a letter of recommendation, but I also wasn't on campus. So what I did, and a previous Prudential student from Northeastern told me this, is I created a PowerPoint and I called it Intro to Julia. And I basically just gave an introduction to myself. I said who I was, what I did on campus, what I did off campus, why I wanted to go to dental school. And then in my emails to each of the people who I wanted letters from, I explained to them why I thought they could write me a good letter. I didn't just say, you know, oh, like I really liked your class, or oh, like I, you know, had fun taking Orgo with you, or, you know, whatever that. I said, you know, I think that you saw me be resilient in your class. I think you saw me be determined and hardworking. And I think that was a selling point for a lot of people. And then also utilize your co-op supervisors. I worked really closely with two surgeons, and so I was able to get supplemental letters of recommendation from them. And definitely ask them early. I know letters aren't due until I think like mid-March, but I asked in October. I waited until the first round of midterms were done so that professors weren't overwhelmed. And I asked, and I kept following up with them every month, and most of them had their letters in before March 15th, which was really nice.
Yeah, I can add to that a little bit. I feel like when it came to letters, it was definitely something that I kind of thought of when I was entering a class or just being within a class, like what the relationship the professor and I had, and kind of what I was learning from that class and what I was displaying through that class. So I would just definitely have that in the back of your head from the get-go if you can. And then, like Julia said, definitely the earlier the better, especially with some of the more busy professors or some of the busier MDs. It may be like pulling teeth to get them to write these letters. But you also have to be willing to kind of supply them with anything that they may ask for. A lot of my letters ask for a resume, and then also for me to write like an essay about what I displayed to them and like what our relationship was and what I think they can incorporate into the letter. You won't write the letter for them, obviously, but you have to be willing to kind of be able to kind of hold their hand while they go through it, because they can obviously be busy. So that's one thing I didn't expect, but definitely think about this early on and try and be able to kind of create that list before, or at least a few months before you actually ask.
Thank you. I want to be mindful of time as we're kind of coming to the end of our meeting. We do have one more question in the chat. If you all could sort of touch on, because we do have a few different standardized tests here, the MCAT, the DAT, and then Amber, some PA schools don't require standardized tests, but maybe you took the GRE or the PA CAT. Can you all speak to best ways to prepare for those things? I might start with Julia because she is a DAT instructor. If you want to get us started on that and then pass the mic over.
Yeah, so I use DAT Bootcamp, which is an online subscription, and then I also use DAT Destroyer, which is a book. Definitely don't buy new books. You can get like the 2018, 2019 versions, and it will still be applicable to the test. I decided to take the DAT while I was on co-op, so I didn't have to worry about also studying for classes, and I think that was the best thing for me to do. And then, of course, the pre-health advising department holds a DAT prep course and I think MCAT prep course every semester. So when I was studying for the DAT, I took it and I did well enough that I've taught it last semester and I'm also teaching it this semester. So if you want to join that, I'm sure Anna can get you connected.
Hope, will you speak to your MCAT experience?
Yeah, so I made a schedule for studying probably over Thanksgiving, and I was taking it in May. And then I really started studying over winter break, started with content review. I used the Kaplan books. You'll hear different things from everyone. I bought like the package with the books and some practice tests, and then I also bought the AAMC package that had more questions and practice tests as well. And I basically did content review for a couple months. Probably took my first practice test in like early February or late January. And then started doing just kind of a practice test almost every weekend, as well as more content review and questions throughout the weeks. And I tried to like make flashcards and take notes from the content review. Definitely didn't make it back through all of them. But I think the biggest thing was doing kind of all of those practice tests, reviewing what I got wrong, and then kind of going back to those questions and making sure I understood them. And I think I probably took like 10 practice tests by the end of the review. And I ended up doing a lot better on my MCAT than I did on any of the practice tests. So I think it totally depends on which one you take and how hard it is and how it gets curved. But
And I can go really quick. So I did the GRE. Not some schools don't require any tests, and if you want to not have to take a test for PA school, then just go apply to those schools. But I felt like taking the GRE kind of opened up my options more and didn't limit me to certain regions or certain schools. I do know that some PA schools are starting to move towards the PA CAT. I did not take that, and I didn't see any in this past cycle that required it, but just be mindful of that because it's essentially the MCAT plus anatomy. So you're going to need like 6 months to study. The GRE, I studied for like 3 months and I probably didn't even need that much time. It's like essentially the SAT with more vocab. There's also I think it's called the Casper, and I think some med schools require it too. I did take that. I personally didn't. So I probably watched like a couple of practice videos. Like you really don't have to study for it. If you are like, you basically have to just answer moral and ethical reasoning questions. It's not really hard. It's just as long as you're not like unethical, like you'll do well on the test. But that usually like I think they only have certain exams, and only certain schools require it. So again, you can work around that if you just don't apply to those schools. But I think taking the GRE kind of opens up more schools for PA applicants.
Okay, well, we are coming to a close, and to be mindful of everyone's time, I want to thank the panelists so much for taking time out of their busy schedules to meet with us today and to share a little bit about their experience. Congratulations again to you all for doing so well. We really appreciate your time, and we're so proud to call you alumni and soon to be alumni. So thank you, attendees, for attending. This meeting will be recorded and we will share it via email, and it'll be posted on our website. So thank you, everyone, for joining. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.